Welcome to Close Listening. I'm your host, Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. And today's video is kind of a meditation on my journey of what it means to be a music commentator on this platform. I know I'm someone who likes my own musical writing process. I'm a singer-songwriter. I work on my albums. But I'm also someone who's invested in being a broader part of the music community. I'm the kind of person who might, like to host my own music radio show, though obviously going out and pursuing that as a career can be a bit of an intimidating thing when you have other jobs in your life. And on top of that, there's a lot of music hosting on the radio. It feels like it's just playing the songs and reading the ads, but not really getting to take deep dives into the music. So I just sort of explored this idea with taking out albums from the library, albums that I was curious about, and sort of commenting on them, sometimes based on a bit of research, sometimes off the cuff. And so I decided, because I'm aware of virality as a concept, when I listened to the Beatles' first ever album, Please Please Me, for the first time, I decided, rather than doing a bit of research, I'll just sort of listen to these songs one by one and comment on them. And I found that was a good formula for getting views. People like to click on videos that say react in the title, for better or for worse. So I experimented with that with a few other significant albums. I did it to U2's The Joshua Tree, I did it with ABBA's Arrival, and I did it with Pink Floyd's Animals. Now, with Pink Floyd, I suppose you could say I was asking for a little trouble. I called that video something like Pink Floyd's Skeptic Reacts to Animals. And the premise of that video was, in the past when I'd been younger, I'd been very frustrated with Pink Floyd, and now I was giving them a try a few years later, trying to like them. I enjoyed making that video, I enjoyed listening to the Animals album. It didn't turn me into a Pink Floyd fan, but I appreciated listening to a different kind of artistic experience. I appreciated listening to some of the sounds, and that video instantly blew up as my first success. Well, at least in terms of views. It crossed 3,000 views, which compared to the other, abysmal view counts I'm getting at this time, the good ones are usually in the hundreds. A lot of them are in the tens or the 20s. That felt like a real success. However, I was also getting a lot of not so friendly comments from people who were annoyed that I didn't like Pink Floyd, people saying I had no taste, and people saying I didn't understand the album. Now, the not understanding thing, maybe there's a bit of truth there because, again, I was doing it as an off-the-cuff reaction. I wasn't researching some of the references. So there's a reference in that album, for instance, to White House. And I assume that was a critique of American power, of the White House, when in fact it was a critique of a British morality campaigner whose name is Mary Whitehouse. But it was an interesting experience, seeing all these people not liking my commentary. On the one hand, I can say, the internet is full of haters, that this doesn't invalidate you intellectually. There are all these people who think that this incredibly abstract album has only one correct interpretation. Like, no English professor, poetry analyst, music critic worth their salt would say that, but apparently that's a thing you get on the YouTube comments. I suppose it bothered me because I would understand why on political YouTube there'd be a lot of fighting, there's moral stakes, but I just sort of figured music fans, especially 60s, 70s music fans, would just be full of peace and love and would just have lots of nice things to say. And as someone who identifies with the music scene of the 60s and 70s and half seriously says I wish I was there, it kind of makes me sad when all these older fans of this older music are like, you did not 100% like our album, therefore we're not going to like you. But I think the other reason that experience got to me was the very raison d'etre of that video. I'm someone who likes a lot of 60s, 70s, also 50s music, so it really frustrated me that I don't like Pink Floyd. When you see images of the classic albums, up there with Sgt. Pepper's and Bridge Over Troubled Water and Pet Sound, you'll see Dark Side of the Moon. And I always felt disoriented when I listened to Dark Side of the Moon because I felt, this sounds so profoundly different. How is it in the same category as these other things? One of the nicer comments in my Pink Floyd video was someone who said, Pink Floyd is the Mahler of rock. Some people don't get Mahler. And fair enough. If Pink Floyd was part of classical music culture or jazz culture, it would bother me less that I didn't like it because, yeah, I don't like instrumental music as much. I don't like, pretty popular genres of music. I respect them. I can tell that it takes an immense amount of talent to make them. But what bothers me about Pink Floyd is it's just treated like it's part of mainstream rock and roll. It's something that is extremely commercial. So when I don't like it, I don't just feel, okay, this isn't my style. I feel like I must not be getting something. So rather than just doing the smart thing and being like, Zach, go home, don't make any more videos about Pink Floyd on YouTube, I decided I wanted to continue my journey and find the Pink Floyd album that I would genuinely appreciate. So one of the suggestions people made in comment sections and when talking to me is this record called Metal. It comes right before Dark Side of the Moon. And unlike Dark Side and unlike Animals, it has some conventional 60s music on it. It's, there's lyrics from top to bottom. There's one consistent melody throughout. And I think people interpret my critique of Pink Floyd, and in fairness, I would have too, that, music is supposed to sound relatively normal, that if you're doing too many things at once, it just becomes a mess of coolness and actually loses its artistic value through its complication. But what I found when I listened to the songs on Metal is that while I thought they were fine, and to be clear, this album does have some Pink Floyd style experimentation at the beginning and the end, and it has more normal 60s psychedelic pop in the middle, but it just wasn't that interesting. And what it made me realize is the right Pink Floyd album for me is not going to be Pink Floyd sounding like someone else. It's going to be Pink Floyd sounding like themselves, but somehow getting through to me. I also tried Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which is Pink Floyd's first album, and that's because it's the only one that Syd Barrett, the founding singer-songwriter, was fully involved with before he went on a solo career and had all kinds of mental health problems that made it difficult for him to work with the rest of the band. A singer-songwriter I like, Robin Hitchcock, has cited Syd Barrett as one of his big influences along with John Lennon, so I figured maybe this is the era of Pink Floyd I'm gonna like. But not quite. What you get on Piper at the Gates of Dawn is music that's more overtly psychedelic than the later Pink Floyd, and you get a long list of tracks. So there are 11 songs on this as opposed to the 5 on Animals. But it doesn't necessarily mean they have the smoothness, the charismatic vocals one would expect on the pop folk music that I like. There's still a lot of weirdness, still a lot of experimentation. It's not trying to be catchy. And the best songs on this one, they were more gimmicky than great. So there's a song on here called The Gnome. It's a bit more complicated than David Bowie's The Laughing Gnome, but it has a similar vibe to it. It's more of a novelty song than a song you would say is your outright favorite. So I was searching for Pink Floyd that fit within my parameters. I tried that with Metal. I tried that with Piper. Then I tried one more suggestion that people had made, The Wall. So I had a bit of a relationship to The Wall before listening to this record because I was lucky enough to go to a public middle school in which our music class was playing the guitar. And though I had learned guitar a bit before that, I did learn some songs from my hippie music teacher, such as Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. That was the one we did. We don't need no education. So this album, it's not what I thought I would have wanted. So there are a lot of songs on here that are not conventionally structured. There are long moments of instrumentalism. But something about it just worked for me. So thinking back, what was it that I did not like about Animals? I think one thing was that the instrumental breaks were too long. So I'm someone who actually can appreciate instrumental experimentalism. My critique of it is that the meaning of sound is socially constructed. Like major and minor keys don't even mean the same thing in all cultures. We eventually need words to contextualize our instrumental breaks. So I'm fine with weird instrumentalism, I'm fine with short and sometimes medium pauses for instrumentalism, but I honestly thought some of the songs on Animals really just eventually sounded like jam sessions, and any meaning in that Animals, rising up, working class metaphor, it just gets lost in the long solos. Whereas in The Wall, even if they're not constantly singing, even if there's not a tangible verse, chorus, verse structure in every song, There's always some words in there, even if it's just like a comic sound sampling. If you don't eat your meat, you can't have any pudding. That kind of stuff. My other problem with Animals, and with some of the other Pink Floyd recordings I heard, is just the style of the vocal delivery. So Roger Waters has a very craggy voice, and singers do not have to have strong, smooth voices in order to make beautiful music. I mean, we all know about Bob Dylan with his nasally sound. Rod Stewart simultaneously has an amazingly strong voice and one that's incredibly cracked. But I have this sense with a lot of Pink Floyd records that because they're so into the artistry and the imagery, the vocals are kind of secondary to that. So Roger Waters has this cracked voice that a lot of the time isn't too powerful, and then David Gilmour has a beautiful voice, but it's just sort of uncharismatic, psychedelic. It doesn't win you over as a personality on its own. But with The Wall, I think both of them really got the best out of their vocal performances. So even though Roger Waters has that cracked voice, he's using all the strength in his voice possible. Some of the vocal performances are really emotional. I'll name drop those when I quickly go through the tracks. And then when you hear David Gilmour on Comfortably Numb, which, look, it's the least weird song on the album, and I assume it'll probably remain my favorite Pink Floyd album, even if it's that sort of calm, psychedelic voice. It's just a perfect match between voice and song that it's fully memorable. So let's go through some of the tracks on The Wall. So the first song on the album is called In the Flesh. It really takes you in. It starts out quiet, and then it boom, and then it gets interesting. So I was reading about what this song was about, and Roger Waters had noticed that at this point, Pink Floyd had become really famous. And so there were all these people coming to shows, and he had the sense they weren't really appreciating music. They were trying to get their hands on Pink Floyd's fame, trying to touch that magical moment, so to speak. And I sort of heard this song as a criticism of myself. I sort of assumed that because I like the Beatles and David Bowie and the Beach Boys that I have to like Pink Floyd too. And maybe it's okay for me not to like Pink Floyd, to leave Pink Floyd to the Pink Floyd fans. But even as this first song is kind of criticizing people like me, it brought me into an album that I did like a bit better. The next track is called The Thin Ice. It starts with a baby crying, and Wikipedia sort of emphasizes that it has a 50s doo-wop structure to this, but you really miss that 50s doo-wop simplicity because of all the musical experimentation that's going on, the different emphatic drum, guitar, and keyboard sounds on it. The other important thing to note with this song is that this album, it's about a character. I haven't seen the movie associated with it, which maybe makes it more obvious, I don't know, but this character is called Pink Floyd, and it basically follows him having an overbearing mother, going to school, having sort of stereotypical abusive English boarding school teachers, and just wanting to fence himself off from the rest of society, and then somehow becoming a Nazi. Maybe someone else can explain that better. I'm mostly just appreciating the music here, and I don't know how coherent the story it is and whether it matters if it's coherent. But anyway, track number 3 is another Brick in the Wall Part 1. Waters' bass sounds in a way here like it's imitating the sound of military choppers. We learned that Pink's father had gone off to war, and so he feels separated from his father. He didn't have a proper upbringing in that sense. The next track on the album is called The Happiest Days of Our Lives. It starts out with Nazi cries, and it starts with sort of, I don't know if people were using the term rap at the time, but it just starts with this talk singing part about abusive teachers. And this is where I get into Roger Waters finally does the perfect thing with his voice. His voice just explodes out. It's loud and it's rich, and then there's this nice little musical motif that's very distinct. It kind of reminds me something from The Lion King. And then you get to that song I know, number 5, Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2. I suppose this counts as one of the hits from the album. It's calling on teachers to leave those kids alone. It's vague enough that sort of any kid who's just sort of frustrated with school can appreciate it, but it's really specifically about that strict English boarding school experience. The next song you have is Mother, and it's this combination of conventional folk song and kind of weird. Another thing, Pink Floyd, their lyrics aren't contained in an easily digestible rhythmic way. They prioritize getting their ideas out, however cryptic those ideas are, over having a nice, sweet lyrical structure. That said, the singing on the song is beautiful enough, and the meaning is haunting enough. It's about this overbearing mother suppressing Pink by offering to shield him from the world. That it's the kind of song you can enjoy if you're not into the weirder Pink Floyd stuff. Next on the album comes Goodbye Blue Sky. It starts with a boy looking to the sky, speaking in this cute little English accent. It has some nice harmonized vocals in there. I think it just sort of brings the military motif back into the album, brings in vague feelings of loneliness. It's a nice little beautiful song. Next on the album comes Empty Spaces. It's just a sort of straight, dark instrumental before you get into the track 9, Young Lust, which is a sort of angry rock sound, and it ends with a call to Pink Floyd being the character's parents. Next comes One of My Turns. It sounds like a kind of eerie movie. It opens with, "Oh my God, what a fabulous room. Are all these guitars yours?" And I assume this is a reference to Roger Waters' frustration with fame, with idolizing music. That said, it offers a nice musical contrast to Young Lust. The lyrics are softer day after day. Lust turns gray like the skin on a dying man. But then it builds off to a flashy show-off song about the guitars and another one of these great vocal performances from Waters. He may have a scratchy voice, but it's full of power, full of emotion when he wants it to be. And it ends excellently with this line, "Why are you running away?" Next is track 11, Don't Leave Me Now. My reaction to it was just to say it sounds sort of like a Vertigo hangover kind of feel. It's a disorienting song about a crumbling relationship. And then you get to track 12, another brick in the wall, part 3. You hear the sound of bricks splashing, and it says, "I don't need no walls around me, and I don't need no drugs to calm me." So the wall in the context of this record is the character Pink Floyd shielding himself from the world. It's a more elaborate version of the Paul Simon song, "I Am a Rock. I can build a wall around me." I'm kind of confused why only halfway through the album he's saying the wall is breaking. I mean, maybe he's changing his strategy from just sort of sticking to himself and being antisocial in that way to the Nazi figure who comes out on the second side of the album. I don't quite get the timing of the story, but anyway, it's just more of that another brick in the wall feel. And finally, you get Goodbye Cruel World, which is what it sounds like. It's a non-literal suicide song for the Pink Floyd character. And then you immediately jump into disc 2, which starts with the song Hey You. It has a sort of Ziggy Stardust feel to me. Not the song Ziggy Stardust, but the whole album, the idea of this grand, alienated rock star. Then next on the album comes Is There Anybody Out There? And this continues the Ziggy Stardust feel for me. It has a very science fiction sound to it, including the doubling of voices. But despite being very spacey, you can also hear some acoustic guitars in there. I think Pink Floyd's ability to bring an acoustic sound, quite grand experimental works, is one of their strengths. It's actually one of the things I liked about Animals, even though all the angry commenters on that video didn't notice. I actually did say some nice things about the Animals album. The next track on there is called Nobody Home. It has a kind of jazzy sound to it, makes use of a big string sound. I think of it as having a more conventional melody among the songs on the album, but it shows how you can have a conventional melody and make use of little interesting musical choices along the way. Next comes a song called Vera. I found this one sounded kind of Harry Chapin-y. For those who don't know Harry Chapin, he does these long storytelling kind of melancholy ballads. Taxi is a great example of his work, so I heard a bit of that in the Pink Floyd song Vera. Next you have a stylized orchestral song called Bring the Boys Back Home. It's again bringing the military theme into the album, and it's just really melodramatic singing. And then finally you get to this great hit, my favorite Pink Floyd song, Comfortably Numb. It's the most normal sounding song on this album, which is really saying something because it's a very weird title. It makes use of these kind of haunting strings, but they're actually playing a very simple triad kind of melody, and it's just a matter of putting all these simple things together with this slightly weird lyrical thing, and you get a song that is like few others, but still starkly normal on the context of a Pink Floyd album. Next, you have a song called The Show Must Go On, followed by a track called In the Flesh. In the Flesh, again, being the opening song on the album. It sort of continues from that opening song with more of a choral sound. So I guess it's like that moment in a movie where you start somewhere and now you're back at the beginning. So Pink Floyd has grown up into this alienated singer we were introduced to in the first track. The next song is called Run Like Hell. This one sort of has hit potential, even though the vocals are kind of muted relative to the instrumental stuff. That said, the guitar riff is so memorable that it still mostly works for me. Then you get a very weird titled song, but it's still vaguely normal sounding melodically, called Waiting for the Worms. It makes use of a kind of Beach Boys harmony sound, all the while really bringing the fascist motif into the album. And then it has these sort of power chants at the end and makes it sound like a Nazi choir is taking the song out. Then you have this short song called Stop, where Pink says, I want to go home, take off this uniform, and leave the show. So he's denouncing rock stardom, denouncing Nazism. It makes me think of that David Bowie line about how Hitler was the first great rock star. And because Bowie was in a really weird place in his life when he said that, a lot of people held it against him and held it and interpreted it as pro-Hitler, where I really just hear it as this aesthetic comment about how, you know, showing off to a crowd, feeling powerful like a rock star can almost make you feel like you're this fascist dictator rallying a movement that's not necessarily thinking all that clearly. Then you have a kind of Lewis Carroll-y song. It's The Trial. You have a tuba introduction. It's kind of this whole nightmare scene inside Pink's head. And it ends with this call of tear down the wall. Again, I'm a bit confused because I thought the wall was torn down on side one. I guess the point is you can think you're tearing down the wall, but you're really just suppressing it and continuing to live with it. And then you have the very weird conclusion called Outside the Wall. And it's hard to tell, is it about people helping people like Pink Floyd, or is it about denouncing him as this outcast and tyrant? Some of the lyrics go, the bleeding hearts and the artists make their stand, and when they've given you their all, some stagger and fall, and after all, it's not easy, banging your heart against some mad bugger's wall. And then there's a very sudden end. I don't know what to make of that, but it's very musically interesting. Anyway, there is a lot to this album, so much that I really need to keep listening to it many times to get a great sense of what all these songs are about. But I'm glad that I finally made peace with Pink Floyd. They didn't make the album I wanted them to make, but they made the best possible version of one of their albums. And I found out I can like it. Even if it's not liking it in exactly the same way I like other albums. Generally with an album, I appreciate the collection of songs and then pick a favorite. With this one, other than Comfortably Numb, you can't really pick a favorite. You do have to sit through the whole experience, but the whole experience is so amazing. There's so much going on between charisma, between emotion, even the slightest bit of humor, and so many interesting musical choices. It shouldn't be the album you dive into if you're just trying to get into old music, period. But if you're a music fan who's a bit skeptical about Pink Floyd, this would be my recommendation. I think this is the one where you can both understand what they're about and appreciate it, even if what they're about isn't for you 100% of the time. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this long rant. I felt like I had to make this because this just felt like an important part of my musical development. And what am I doing on YouTube but sharing my musical development with you all? So anyway, check out more of these videos. Most of them are going to be shorter. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Silent co-host Ludwig von B. See you next time.